Are you a developer watching endless tutorials all the time but struggle to build applications on their own? Most developers think they just haven't found the right tutorial yet, so they keep watching tutorials endlessly. But what they don't realize is that they are stuck in tutorial hell. So here is the truth. It's not about the number of tutorials you watch, it's about how you watch them. Hi everyone, my name is Laszlo and I'm a full-stack web developer and engineering manager with 15 years of experience working in the industry, building web applications and leading software engineering teams. Here is the truth. I wasn't always good at learning new things. Actually, I was stuck in tutorial hell for years as well as a developer. I would spend days watching tutorials or online courses thinking that I'm actually learning new things, only to realize that my brain got completely frozen when I needed to use that knowledge when working on an application. So in this video today, I'm going to show you the exact framework that helped me break out from tutorial hell and start building projects with confidence. Using my simple framework, you will learn how to transform any tutorial into real applicable knowledge. So let's dive in. You know what's really interesting? Back in 1971, a Canadian psychologist called Alain Pavio discovered something really interesting about our mind. He found that our brain processes information much more effectively if it receives the input in two different channels, verbal and visual. You can think of it like when you are watching a movie with subtitles. You can actually see the words on the screen, but you can actually hear them, so it's much easier to process the information for your brain. And get this, when you use both channels to learn something new, your brain will remember 65% more of the information you learn. This is why pictures are so much easier for our brain to remember than just simple text. When I learned about this, it completely changed how I looked at learning new things. And this is why the framework I'm going to show you today is so effective. I call it the 4D framework. It has 4 stages: discover, document, digest, and do. Now let's dive in and see what this framework is about and why it can help you break out from tutorial hell. The first step in the framework is called discover. So now let's see an example. Let's say you were trying to learn promises in JavaScript. You start watching tutorials about promises and you start copying code from the tutorial into your application you are working on, and you just say, okay, I will understand what promises really does some other time. I can figure out how to handle errors later down the road. Let's just make some progress now. And guess what? All these next time or later down the road, these times will never actually come. So you will never understand these new concepts just by doing this. So here's what I suggest to do differently. Every time you watch a tutorial and you learn something new, start asking questions. For example, with this promise example, ask questions like, why do we even need promises when we have callbacks? What's the difference between the then and the catch method? What is the finally method and how can I use it? With this simple step, just asking questions for yourself will force you to go deeper in the topic and get a better understanding about the details. The next step, number 2, is what I call document. Think of it like creating your own developer knowledge base, but the trick is you create it with your own words, so you have to write it on your own, by yourself. This means when you learn something new, like the promises in JavaScript, you try to write it down with your own words after you learned about the concept. For example, with promises, you can say, promises in JavaScript is like ordering food in a restaurant. When you order a food, you get an immediate feedback as a receipt, and then you will get the food eventually. In this example, when you order the food, it's basically when you fire a request, And when you get the receipt immediately, it's when you get the promise in the code immediately back. And if something goes wrong in the kitchen, that's when your promise will get rejected. Now compare this simple explanation that you wrote down to the official documentation of promises, and see how much easier it is to remember for you than the official technical documentation. You create this simple metaphor and it will be so much easier for your brain to remember this. Step number 3, digest. And this is very important because this is where most developers miss. So after you learned something new and wrote it down, in 24 hours the next day, try to explain this new thing that you learned in your own words, but without looking at your notes. So this way you are forcing your brain to recall the information. After you were able to do it, connect this new concept with the things you already know. For example, with the promise and the restaurant example, you can go on with the metaphor and say things like representing your food is basically the promise. The receipt representing your food in the restaurant is basically the promise representing the future data in your code. The kitchen preparing your food is like a server processing your requests. The waiter who brings the food to the table when it's ready, it's kind of like when the promise is getting resolved, so you receive the value and you call the then method. When the kitchen runs out of ingredients for your food, they cannot make the food, it's kind of like when your promise gets rejected and you call the catch error handler. And getting a different dish when they run out of ingredients for your original food is like handling the error in the catch method. This simple mental model will help you understand new things much more effectively than any other tutorial in itself will. And finally, step 4. Do. This is where the magic happens. Instead of starting another tutorial when you already learned something new, try to apply that knowledge into action. This means that you should build something from scratch using that new knowledge you have just learned. For example, with promises, you can just sit down, build a simple weather application, gather some weather data from a public weather API using promises, use the then and the catch method to react on the data coming back from the APIs, and then on the final log message when everything is done, we're using the finally method on the promise. By following this 4D framework, you will be much more effectively understand new concepts than following any tutorial just by watching it. Because if you just watch tutorials endlessly, you will overwhelm your brain and it will forget the new information in just a few days or in a few weeks. But on the other hand, this framework will help you remember and store so much more information in just a few hours compared to watching tutorials for days. Look, getting stuck in tutorial hell I think is a completely normal thing as a developer. Most of the developers go through it. You probably already experienced it and that's why you were interested in this video. But think about it this way. Coding is a lot like swimming. You can watch all the videos about it, but you will only learn it by getting into the water. So coding is exactly the same. You can watch all the coding tutorials and courses online, but you will only actually learn it if you get your hands dirty. So stop watching coding tutorials and start building something today. And reflecting back to the 4D framework and why it is so effective, when you use the discover and the document phase of the framework, you are using both words and visuals to learn. This way, your brain much more effectively remembers what you are trying to learn. It's the same just like watching a movie with subtitles. In the digest phase, you are helping your brain to remember things. In the same way, just like you are remembering your favorite keyboard shortcut because you are using it every day. And in the do phase, you are getting your hands dirty, so actually using the knowledge and the skills you have learned. It's the same when you're jumping in the water and start swimming. This is the only way to actually learn something. And that was the 4 steps to break free from tutorial hell. I hope you found it useful. If you want to learn more about this technique and actually practice it on a daily basis, if you want to master this framework effectively, I created a guide with exact examples how you can practice it and use it. I normally only share it with people who I mentor in one-on-one sessions. But today I'm sharing it with you and it's completely free. Check the links in the description. And thank you guys, thank you for watching. And if you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you would like to hear about me and more content related to development. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.